Before we get into the stories, I would like to let you all know that I'm taking story submissions to narrate. I will credit you in the description of the video unless you ask me not to, so if you have an experience or story in mind that you would like me to read, then you can email me at feedingonfear@gmail.com, and I will be sure to include it in my videos. Thank you so much for watching, and enjoy the stories. The landscape of late night and early morning television is often a lonely, desolate place. You know the kind. The hours between the midnight hour and dawn when most of the world is asleep, but you're wide awake, your mind buzzing, restless. I've lost count of how many times I found myself glued to the screen, flipping between channels with an eerie mix of detachment and curiosity, watching infomercials about things like boner vacuums, overpriced facial cleansers, or miracle weight loss pills. I'd sit there, slack-jawed and half-conscious with my brain in that hazy limbo between waking and sleep, thinking, why am I doing this? What happened to me? You feel a little bit like you're trapped in the equivalent of a digital wasteland, a place where nothing good or meaningful can exist. And the worst part is, usually you can't even turn the TV off. Like you're pulled into a hypnotic trance, unable to look away. The mind-numbing content unfolds before you. And in that odd, dreamlike state, the things that should be strange or funny end up feeling not exactly real, but still profoundly unsettling. Hard to explain. It's as if you've crossed over into a parallel reality, where nothing has quite the same sense of gravity or meaning. Television, especially late-night TV, has become more and more sterile in recent years. The days when you could stumble across something that made you question everything. Those days are long gone. The world is now controlled by sponsors, the content regulated by a narrow set of rules, and nothing feels truly subversive or dangerous anymore. Everything's been sanitized, packaged, and sold with the same corporate precision as any other product on the shelf. The networks no longer take risks. There's no space for the bizarre, the uncomfortable, or the unnerving. But on rare occasions, if you're willing to dig deep enough, you can still find something. A show, an image, a moment that leaves you unsettled. Like a splinter under your skin that refuses to be removed. I stumbled upon one such show years ago, and it's haunted me ever since. It was called Faith Buddies. To understand why Faith Buddies left such a lasting impression on me, you have to know a little bit about my childhood. I grew up in a Protestant family, your average suburban Christian household. We went to church every Sunday, prayed before dinner, and lived by the values taught in the Bible. But when I was about 10, everything changed. My parents decided to move us from the bustling city to a small town in the middle of nowhere. A town so deep in Calvinist territory that it felt like stepping into a strange, self-contained world. The town had this air of something out of a dystopian novel. A place where life seemed to follow an unspoken, rigid set of rules. The kind of place where every conversation, every relationship, every event seemed filtered through the lens of predestination. It wasn't just a Calvinist town. It felt like it was Calvinism. The people here believe, with a near fanatical certainty, that everything, from the smallest detail to the grandest cosmic scheme, had been determined long before birth. Your fate was sealed from the moment you took your first breath. Some were chosen for heaven. Everyone else was destined for hell. There was no room for doubt, no room for questioning. You either accepted it, or you left. At first, my family tried to adjust. My parents were trying to be good, committed members of the community. But soon we found ourselves out of place. In church, everyone was constantly measuring their own piety, comparing their salvation like people measuring their wealth. It wasn't enough to just be saved. You had to prove it every day, in every action. I remember the pressure, constant sense of surveillance, the unspoken rule that if you didn't toe the line, you risked being shunned, judged, or abandoned by God. The most unsettling part of living in this town was the air of inevitability that permeated everything. People spoke of life with an eerie calm, as if nothing really mattered because it had already been decided. And while that might sound comforting to some, for me it felt like I was living in a glass cage, constantly aware that I was being watched, both by my community and by God. There was no escaping the suffocating weight of it all. My classmates at school seemed to know their place already. They could talk about sin and salvation with the same ease as discussing the weather. The children at the playground would compare their chances of going to heaven, making bets about who would be chosen and wouldn't. In a way, it made me feel like a prisoner in my own mind. As a kid, I couldn't fully grasp the implication of what I was being taught, but I could feel the walls closing in. I didn't talk to anyone about how I felt. I didn't think anyone else would understand, so I retreated inward. When I wasn't at school or church, I would wander around town by myself, avoiding the all-knowing eyes of my neighbors. And that is when I first discovered faith buddies. I can still remember the time I first stumbled on it. It was a Sunday morning. I was at home alone, skipping church for some reason that I can't remember. I'd flipped on the TV out of habit, clicking aimlessly between channels until I landed on the public access station. The colors were murky, the picture was grainy. There was something strangely captivating about the puppets on the screen. The show was seemingly filmed in our local area. The show looked to have a low budget. It was a religious children's program that aired at strange hours, typically either on Sunday mornings or evenings throughout the rest of the week. Characters were simple, 3 puppets. Pinky, the pink and oddly shaped creature with small eyes that would have looked like Kermit the Frog. Bertie, a dim-witted blue hippo, and Gerda, a fuzzy green bird. The premise was simple. Puppets would encounter moral dilemmas and turn to Pinky, their wisdom figure, for answers. As I watched, something felt off. There was a strange tension in the way that Pinky spoke. Something cold and distant, not like the warm, gentle characters in other kids' shows that I'd seen. Pinky wasn't kind, and he wasn't patient. Instead of comforting the other puppets, he treated them with this harsh, cruel condescension. Bertie or Gerda asked a question. Pinky would answer in this flat, dismissive tone, as if they were stupid for not already knowing the answer. I don't know why, but I felt myself drawn to it. It wasn't the puppetry or the storytelling that held my attention. It was Pinky, the way he was so unfeeling and blunt, like he was trying to teach lessons, but in a way that didn't feel right. Pinky's way of answering questions was particularly unsettling. There was no gentleness, no attempt to soften the hard truths of faith. His answers were terse and pointed. He was teaching lessons that were meant to be uncomfortable, make you squirm. I remember one episode where Bertie asked Pinky why bad things happen to good people. Pinky's response was just, "Don't question God's ways." There was no discussion or no further explanation. Just a cold statement that left me and Bertie in stunned silence. This was very evident in the homosexuality episode. They had an episode about gays and the lavender scare, and this delicate subject was treated with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer on glass. Sodom and Gomorrah, drawings of bearded men French kissing, Leviticus 20:13, the dubious statistics regarding AIDS, among other things, the whole shebang. Pinky went so far as to suggest that prison rape was a mass conspiracy concocted by Satan to turn men gay. I know, crazy shit for what was supposed to be children's television. It was almost funny up until the point where this little girl was talking to Pinky about her older brother, who had recently come out as gay to his family. He proceeded to shriek and scowl at her about how he was a sinner fucker destined for hell, leaving the poor girl on the verge of tears. It was when I first started to really question what the intent was behind this show. It was always a little odd, but the latter episodes had become quite vile and mean-spirited. It almost felt like satire, since half of the stuff these characters were saying felt so unrealistic. Along with everything else, even the way Faith Buddies started an episode was strange. It would feature Pinky asking questions like, "How do you feel about blank?" or saying, "Today we're going to talk about," followed by a black title card showing a word like guilt. or forgiveness in white font on a colored title card. But what really caught my attention were the Bible stories. That wasn't the sanitized version for children. There was nothing cute or fluffy about them like you'd see in film adaptations of Bible stories. When they told the story of Cain and Abel, the screen didn't shy away from showing the blood and violence. When they spoke about Noah's Ark, the drowning people were shown in graphic detail, and the plagues of Egypt weren't just a lighted-hearted tale. They were depicted with a frightening intensity. Pinky would talk about God's wrath with this zeal that made me feel uneasy. But I wasn't supposed to be listening to this. Some kind of, cult initiation. It was the tone of the show that lingered with me, though. The sense of something darker beneath the surface. Even as a child, I could sense that something was wrong. The lessons being taught weren't just about faith and salvation. They were about control and fear. Years went by, and I grew older, and moved out of the small town, and distanced myself from religion. The memories of my childhood, the oppressive atmosphere in that town, of faith buddies faded into the background. I put it all behind me, or at least I thought I did. It wasn't until I was in my mid-20s, living in a small apartment in a city where no one knew my name, that I found faith buddies again. It was a late night. I had a few too many drinks and was chilling out in an area not far from where my old home used to be channel surfing. Mindlessly flipping through the stations, something about the static of the public access station caught my eye. Without thinking, I clicked on it. And there it was. Faith buddies. The same strange puppets, the same grainy visuals, but this time I wasn't a child, I was an adult, more cynical and world-weary. But I still couldn't look away. This episode was about predestination, a key teaching in the Calvinist doctrine of Christianity. The word flashed on the screen in stark white text. It felt like a warning. I watched in silence as the familiar scene unfolded. Bertie, Gerda, and some children were asking questions about predestination. Pinky's voice was colder, more assured than I remember. Children asked, "What does it mean to be predestined?" Pinky answered in that same emotionless tone. "Some are destined for heaven, some are destined for hell. You won't know for sure until you die, but you can feel it in your heart." Children became visibly uncomfortable. You could see the fear in their eyes, and one boy asked, "But how do we know if we're chosen?" Pinky, his face was still unnervingly hard, answered, "You can't know, but it doesn't matter. Either you're chosen, or you're not." After stating this, the camera panned to Pinky's face. He turned his head around a bit to face the camera and glare at the viewer, before suddenly being cut off. And then it came back on again. But this moment would change everything. A title card came on the screen with a blackish red backtop reading, "There is no redemption for the damned." What followed was a slideshow, disturbing and surreal. People burning in hell, their faces contorted in pain. People chained up, devoured by monstrous creatures. The camera zoomed in on Pinky, his face an unblinking mask of joy. "This is the wrath of the Lord," he said. The screams of the damned echoed in the background. The gnashing of teeth and prying away at metal chains could be heard in the background, as well as the repulsive howling and snorting that came from the demon. Whatever they used to make those puppets, I couldn't tell you for the life of me if they were puppets in the first place. Twisted forms resembled something born from the deepest caverns of a fevered mind. Standing just over 7 feet tall, their bodies an unnatural assembly of gnarled, brittle limbs, each joint unnaturally articulated like a twisted marionette, yet with the semblance of raw, crude stitching that might belong to an unholy creature of old. I couldn't even tell if the thing was a puppet or a costume anymore, or if it might have been something worse. Their faces command attention. This horrifying mask of raw, pig-like brutality. Their skin was slick and rubbery, resembling an oiled boar's hide, mottled in shades of dark, bruise-like purple, filthy gray, and sallow yellow. Thick, coarse, black hair sprouted in patches along its brow and neck. clinging to the skin like an afterthought of some malevolent god's design. The eyes were huge and bulbous and a sickly yellow. They stuck out with this unnatural intensity, had snake-like pupils dilating in unsettling ways. They gleam with malevolent intelligence, a predatory gleam that pierces through the dim light as if watching and calculating. The nose was a grotesque snout, not flat but swollen and cavernous, with two large flared nostrils that twitched with every shift of the puppet. A long, jagged set of tusks, yellowed and cracked and sharp as knives, curl out from the sides of its face, resting almost menacingly against its bloated cheeks. The tusk glistened with something dark and sticky. Maybe oil, maybe something worse. Their mouth is an open cavern, filled with rows of needle-thin teeth, each one too many for the puppet's own face. Its lips twisted in an eternal sneer, like it was mocking the very idea of mercy. It hangs in thick strings from the corner of its mouth, like sinister threads ready to drop. The rest of what was on screen was no better. A slideshow of illustrations appeared. There was no Bible story, context, or a moral. Just a glimpse of what the viewer has in store for them if they're not chosen. A man and woman hugging each other before being scorched alive, whilst being changed to a brimstone and coal-covered floor. People being impaled on spiked pillars by flying devils. People in a lake of fire having their bodies burned and regenerated forever. Several men and women being crucified on upside-down crosses, dangling above large metallic cauldrons full of fire. The accompanying music is spliced with sounds of screaming and painful wails, with intermittent quips from Pinky such as, "This is the wrath of our Lord." It makes me happy to see sinners get what they deserve. As the images became more grotesque and nightmarish, something inside me snapped. This wasn't just a kids show anymore. There was something darker, something that went beyond religious propaganda. This was like a warning, or a ritual, something designed to instill terror. And then the credits rolled, and the scene shifted. A man in a black hood and robe entered the set. He stumbled around for a while before suddenly dousing everything in gasoline, setting the puppets on fire. The camera pulled back, showing the lights and the crew and the set, and the show was over. As I stared at the screen, I felt the cold, empty void that had been gnawing at me for years come rushing back. The man in the hood wasn't just destroying the set, he was destroying something much darker. The faint sound of police cars was also heard too. The TV clicked off and the room went dark. I sat there shivering, unable to move, feeling like I'd seen something that I wasn't supposed to see, something that wasn't meant to be found. And I knew in that moment that I would never be the same again. No one can ever unsee what I saw that night. However, one thing's always stuck with me upon retrospect. The show ran on a shoestring budget, often relied on making its own props and sound effects half the time. I'd hate to imagine where the screaming sounds came from.